Dozens of British former senior military commanders, including 4 former chiefs of the defence staff, have written to Boris Johnson calling on the government to allow more Afghan interpreters to settle in the UK. They say too many of those who worked with British forces have had their applications rejected, and that if any are murdered by the Taliban, the dishonour would lie squarely at our nation's feet. The Ministry of Defence says it's already helped more than 2,000 Afghan staff to come to the UK. This translator, whose identity we're not disclosing, has been turned down for relocation 4 times and fears retribution from the Taliban.
The Taliban don't care for dismiss, for termination. They don't care anything. They just know who work with British or who not. Anybody who work with British, they're gonna kill them, sir. Now I'm really worried about my family and myself in future, that what will happen when the NATO leave Afghanistan. I know I will see my wife and my daughter will get shot, and myself too.
Well, I'm joined now by Peter Ricketts, Lord Ricketts, who was the UK's first national security advisor from 2010 to 2012 under David Cameron, and also served as chair of the Joint Intelligence Committee under Tony Blair. He is one of the signatories of the letter to Boris Johnson. Lord Ricketts, thank you very much for joining us on BBC News. So the government's saying around 2,000 Afghan staff admitted to the UK under this scheme. Do you have any idea how many have applied and been refused?
I don't have the numbers, but there are quite a lot more people who have been considered and refused. Remember, this is a group of people who worked loyally in a very committed way with the British military, but also the British embassy, our diplomats in Afghanistan, and now suddenly find themselves vulnerable as British and other Western forces leave. And our issue is that the scheme the government have set up, although it's very welcome, is moving too slowly and has too many exclusions. The gentleman that you just heard on the call there referred to dismissal. I mean, at the moment, anyone who was dismissed for any reason from working with the British finds it very, very hard to get accepted for relocation, and many other people as well. So I gather that there are up to about another 4,000 people who might be eligible. Many of them seem to have been turned down in the first look at cases, and yet the Taliban don't discriminate between different sorts of people. If you work for the British and they find out about it, then you and your family are at risk. So this is a debt of honour that we need to pay to some very loyal people who work closely with us.
And what other reasons are being given, as far as you're aware, for refusal to relocate? And is there any appeal process, Lord Ricketts?
But the scheme is quite complicated and bureaucratic, and I think there are 4 different levels of accessibility. There is one level where if you're judged to be at extreme risk of threat to life, then you're relocated quickly. But there are others where tests are applied. One of the tests is where you dismissed from the service, and that could be for being late at work or other relatively minor things. And those were often judgments made without due process and without any right of appeal. And then there is an issue of those who were working with the British but not in the public eye, backroom jobs. All of those people are potentially at risk. And from what we gather, an awful lot of people have been turned down when they made their case, and then it is very difficult to get your case reviewed. So we want the scheme to be more generous, more open, quicker, and to try and get these very vulnerable people out of Afghanistan soon, because the risk to them is real.
Strong words from you, and in the letter you talk a moment ago about this being a debt of honour. How fundamental do you think it is to what you believe Britain represents, that this debt is honoured?
These people were prepared to take a risk for themselves and their families to help the British in what we were trying to do in Afghanistan. And I think they did that on expectation that they would be looked after. And if Britain is going to find itself doing military operations abroad again, and we're going to then again require local people to work with us, as will always be the case, they're going to think 2 or 3 times about it if they look back and find that some very loyal and committed Afghan civilians were left to their own fate when the British and the Americans withdrew from Afghanistan. So I think it is both a question of honour, the kind of country that we are when we go and do military operations abroad, but also in our own national interests for when we once again find ourselves with our forces fighting somewhere in the world.
You talk about a very complicated process, a very complicated scheme. Given what we know about the movement of the Taliban in Afghanistan right now, time clearly of the essence to try to get these other Afghanis who have worked with Britain and who you believe should be allowed to resettle, time of the essence then?
Time of the essence, and lives genuinely are at risk. I mean, that's a phrase that is often used, but I think is absolutely the case here. If you think that the British government offered 3 million people in Hong Kong the opportunity to come to the UK, I think quite rightly, the few thousand that might be involved at maximum in Afghanistan seems to me to be a number that is quite manageable. And yes, as you say, the Taliban are spreading their grip across Afghanistan, and therefore we're in a race against time here. That's why we'd like the government scheme to be implemented more rapidly and more generously, supporting its principle, but the way it's being applied needs to be speeded up.
Lord Ricketts, thank you very much for joining us today. Peter Ricketts there, Lord Ricketts.